Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. Kyiv is asking for a new format of peace talks with Russia after the US-led diplomatic effort ended up with a stalemate. And to discuss the latest from Ukraine and more, we're joined by William B. Taylor, former US ambassador to Ukraine. Good evening.
Good evening, message.
So, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says no fruitful talks have taken place in the last few months, and the US won't engage in counterproductive negotiations. To quote the Secretary of State, "We stand ready to play whatever constructive role we can play. If someone else would like to handle it, they should." Well, the question here is the US giving up on Ukraine?
The U.S. is not giving up on Ukraine. It's very important for the United States, for U.S. foreign policy, for U.S. security policy, that Ukraine succeed. It's very important for Europe that Ukraine succeed, and therefore it's important to the United States as well. So if the United States can play a role, could be helpful in these negotiations, as Secretary Rubio has indicated, they should do that. But as you know, the mediators, the negotiators, the United States, are engaged in the Middle East, engaged with Iran, engaged with Gaza. And apparently we only have two negotiators that are able to represent the United States. I find this surprising. I imagine others will find it surprising as well. But the attention of the U.S. government at this time is on Iran. So it's important for Ukraine to move forward. It's important for Europe to move forward. And if there are Europeans that want to engage, and they should, Europeans should be engaged in these negotiations between the Ukrainians and the Russians, then that would be a good thing.
But you need two to tango. So Ukraine has regained nearly 600 square kilometers of territory this year alone. And along with long-range strikes, this should pressure Moscow enough to make a joint and negotiating table. That's according to President Zelenskyy. Do you share his opinion?
I do. I think it's both the gains on the battlefield that Ukraine has been able to notch this past couple of months, taking more territory from Russia than the Russians have been able to take from Ukraine. And it's the deep strikes into Russia from Ukraine. More deep strikes have gone from Ukraine into Russia at military targets than the Russians have been able to shoot at Ukraine. So the Ukrainians definitely have the initiative. They have the momentum, and that's putting pressure on Putin. That's what it's going to take to have him come to the table.
Right, about this pressure. Now, Russians, regular Russians, are witnessing the war firsthand now, that drones are reaching Moscow and other big cities. But do you think that it will, in fact, impact the decision-making process in the Kremlin itself?
You know, while Putin undoubtedly knows how Russians feel, and he undoubtedly knows that Russian people are weary of this war, he also knows that he has total control over them. So I don't think President Putin worries too much about what Russians think. He does worry about his ability to continue on the battlefield. So the losses of soldiers, of Russian soldiers, has an effect on him. It has an effect on the people around him, Masid. The people around Putin know that the economy is doing poorly, that the Russian army is doing poorly, that the Ukrainians have the momentum, and they could put pressure on Putin as well.
Right, so Ukrainians do feel that they grasp the momentum. Now, Ukraine also calls for a different format of negotiations, but what would this format be then?
So the Europeans have some experience in these negotiations. As people remember, these Minsk group or the Normandy format, where the Germans and the French tried to play a role. That didn't work. And so they will learn from that. And there's good talk of a senior European that could lead those negotiations for the European side, together with President Zelenskyy and eventually with President Putin. That's what it's going to take. And so maybe a very senior serving president, like the president of Finland, people have suggested. So there could be a format that would have the Europeans and the Ukrainians and the Russians. And if the Americans wanted to participate, that would be fine. But if they're too busy in Iran, then the Europeans can push this forward.
No, but there's a catch here. Now, would Moscow, which is openly hostile towards the EU, be open to Europe-led peace talks? Because, well, the alternative put forward by Kyiv is the meeting of Putin with Zelenskyy.
Meeting with Putin and Zelenskyy has been discussed for some time. The important thing, again, goes back to what we talked about together a minute ago, and that's pressure on Putin. When Putin understands that he's doing badly on the battlefield, when he understands he's doing badly against the Ukrainian deep strikes, when he realizes that the Europeans are supporting Ukraine militarily and financially, this $105 billion loan is an indication to President Putin that the Europeans are going to be there for a long time as well. And then Putin will not have a choice. He will have to come to the table at whatever format, whether it's with Zelenskyy, whether it's Zelenskyy and the Europeans, Zelenskyy, European and Americans. Putin will have to find a way out, and he would like to do it at the bargaining table when he realizes he's losing on the battlefield.
If and when he realizes that, because Kyiv warns of another potential summer offensive this year. And according to Kyiv, it can commence from the territory of Belarus. So what consequences would it have for Belarus and Minsk's relations with the US if the offensive was to be in fact launched from the Belarusian territory?
Well, as we remember, the big invasion in 2022 was launched from multiple directions, but including from Belarus. In fact, the main thrust down toward Kyiv was from Belarus. So they've seen that before, and that would bring them directly, that would bring the Belarusians directly into the conflict. And they would not like to have that happen, so they will try to avoid being drawn in to that, because they will be implicated if the Belarusians allow themselves to be pulled in by Putin. There will be consequences, and the Belarusians know that the consequences of sanctions are very bad.
Precisely, because, you know, if I remember well, not that long ago, Donald Trump himself invited Alexander Lukashenko for his next Board of Peace summit.
He did. And there is a direction there that Lukashenko would like to pursue. I think Lukashenko would like to have some distance from Moscow, but right now he doesn't. Putin pretty much controls Lukashenko and the Belarusians, but the Belarusians know that the implications of them, the consequences for them of getting involved in this war with the Ukrainians would be dire.
Volodymyr Zelenskyy rejects the idea of a partial membership in the EU, but I'm wondering whether this is a smart move, given the fact that there is no consensus within the EU on granting Kyiv, some sort of a fast track to the bloc. So it's better to have nothing than at least, some partial membership.
So we know that sooner or later Ukraine will be a member of the EU. I think, Masid, that sooner or later Ukraine will be a member of NATO as well. That will take a little bit longer, but that will happen. But on the European Union, there's a lot of progress. And of course, the defeat of Viktor Orbán removed one of the major problems, not the only problem, but one of the major problems for EU accession. And so that gives everyone who really does want to have Ukraine as a member of the European Union, be a strong member, the security of the European Union will be much better, much more assured if the Ukrainians were full members. So I think that will happen. There is a desire for movement forward in both Brussels and in Kyiv, and I think they'll be able to find a way forward.
And lastly, I'd like to ask you about the political future of Volodymyr Zelenskyy himself and his government. When and if the war comes to an end, what future awaits the officials stained by current corruption investigations?
Well, when the war ends, and the war will end, when the war ends, then politics will start again in Ukraine. There are many very capable Ukrainians who would like to run for president. President Zelenskyy will decide if he's going to run for president. He may or may not run for re-election. But if he does, it's going to be a real battle. It'll be a real election. The Ukrainians know how to put on free and fair elections, and they do it all the time. There are many very capable Ukrainians that will make it competitive. And so then it's up to the Ukrainian people to decide who they want to take forward. There are times in history that we know where strong wartime leaders have gotten their country through the war only to step down after the war. So that's a possibility for Zelenskyy as well. On the other hand, he may decide to continue to run, and he may do well. It will be a competitive election. It's real politics. That's what we were looking for after the war ends.
William B. Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, was our guest this evening. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, Mats. It's good to be here.
And thank you for watching, and stay with us for more interviews here on TVP World.